The stars went dark. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, watching something impossible happen outside the windows. Space itself seemed to twist and bend like water in a storm. Then the enemy appeared. The Zilonian Armada came out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Their ships looked like giant crystals floating in the black void. Each vessel was 3 times bigger than the largest human battleship. They moved together like dancers, never breaking their precise patterns. How many? Morrison asked his tactical officer. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes stared at her screen. Her face was pale. 10,000 ships, sir, maybe more. They're still coming through the jump point. Morrison felt his stomach drop. The entire human fleet had only 300 vessels. Most of them were old cargo ships with guns stuck on the sides. The Zelonians had enough firepower to turn Earth into space dust. "Sir, we're getting a transmission," said Lieutenant Ben Carter from the communications station. He was young and nervous. His hands shook as he worked the controls. "Put it on screen." Morrison ordered. The main viewer filled with the image of an alien face. The Zelonian looked like a tall, thin human made of pale blue glass. Its eyes were silver and showed no emotion at all. When it spoke, its voice was perfectly calm. "I am Admiral Keffer of the Zelonian Expansion Fleet. You will surrender immediately. Your resistance is calculated to be 0% effective against our forces. You have 1 hour to comply." Morrison looked around his bridge. His crew watched him with worried faces. These were good people. They had families back on Earth. They deserved better than to die in a hopeless fight. But Morrison had spent his whole life in space. He knew something the aliens didn't understand. Humans were different. They didn't give up even when they should. "Open a channel," he told Carter. "Channel open, sir." Morrison stepped forward and looked directly at the alien. "Admiral, thanks for the warning. We'll be ready." The Zelonian's silver eyes blinked slowly. "Your response is illogical. Surrender will preserve your lives. Resistance will result in total destruction. We'll take our chances," Morrison said. "Defiant." Out. The screen went dark. The bridge was quiet for a moment. Then Commander Kate Sullivan spoke up from her position at the navigation station. "Sir, that was either very brave or very stupid," Morrison smiled. "Probably both. But we're not going down without a fight." He walked to the center of the bridge and pressed a button on his chair. His voice echoed through the ship and across the entire human fleet. "All ships, this is Captain Morrison. You've seen what we're up against. The smart thing would be to surrender. But I've never met a human who was smart enough to know when to quit." He paused, looking out at the enemy formation. The Zelonian ships were beautiful in their perfect order. They moved like machines, each one knowing exactly where it belonged. "They think they know us," Morrison continued. "They think we're just another species to conquer. They've done this 47 times before, but they've never fought humans." Lieutenant Commander Hayes was working at her station, analyzing the enemy ships. The data was not good. The Zelonians had energy shields that could stop any human weapon. Their guns could destroy a human ship with one shot. Their computers could predict every move the human fleet might make. "Sir," she said quietly, "I'm not seeing any weaknesses in their formation. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours." Morrison nodded. "Good thing we're not planning to fight them with technology." He turned to Sullivan. "Kate, is everything ready?" Sullivan checked her instruments. "Operation Misdirection is a go, sir. All ships have received their instructions." Morrison looked at his crew. They were scared, but they trusted him. That was what made humans special. They could be afraid and still do their jobs. "Listen up, everyone," Morrison said. "The Zelonians are smart. They're logical. They've calculated exactly how this battle will go. They know we'll form up in standard attack formations. They know we'll try to protect our command ships. They know we'll follow military doctrine." He smiled. "That's why we're going to do none of those things." On the viewer, the Zelonian fleet began to move. Their ships spread out in a perfect sphere around the human forces. Each vessel took its assigned position with mechanical precision. They were preparing to attack. Sir, they're powering up weapons, Hayes reported. Morrison sat down in his captain's chair. All ships execute plan chaos, scatter formation, random headings. Make it look like we're running away? The human fleet exploded into motion. Ships broke formation and headed in different directions. Some dove toward the nearest planet. Others climbed away from the star. A few seemed to be heading straight for the enemy. The Zelonians watched this with confusion. Their computers tried to calculate the human strategy, but there was no pattern to find. The humans were acting like a flock of birds that had been startled by a predator. They're targeting our command ships, Hayes said. At least they think they are. Morrison watched as the enemy fired their first salvo. Brilliant energy beams lanced through space toward the largest human vessels. The beams hit their targets perfectly, vaporizing the ships in balls of fire, but the ships that died were empty cargo haulers. The real command crews were safely aboard smaller vessels scattered throughout the formation. Morrison was actually commanding the fleet from what looked like a simple supply ship. Phase 1 complete, Sullivan reported. They've destroyed our decoys, Morrison nodded. The Zelonians were logical. They would target the most dangerous ships first, but humans had learned long ago that sometimes the most dangerous thing was what you didn't see coming. Sir, they're regrouping, Hayes said. Trying to figure out our command structure. Morrison watched the enemy fleet reorganize. They moved like a living thing, each ship knowing its place in the larger pattern. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. They're going to try to destroy everything, Morrison said. When they can't find our leaders, they'll just kill everyone. Carter looked up from his station. Sir, we're receiving messages from Earth. They want to know if we need reinforcements. Morrison almost laughed. Reinforcements? They were already using every human ship in the outer colonies. There was nothing left to send. Tell them we have everything under control, Morrison said. Sullivan raised an eyebrow. Sir? We do have everything under control, Morrison said. We're controlling the chaos. That's what humans do best. He stood up and walked to the forward windows. The Zelonian fleet was beginning its second attack. This time they weren't being careful about targets. They were going to shoot at everything that moved. All ships, prepare for Phase 2, Morrison announced. Remember, we're not trying to win a fair fight. We're trying to confuse them so badly they can't think straight. The human ships began moving in patterns that made no sense. They fired at empty space. They headed toward asteroids at full speed, then changed direction at the last second. Some ships even seemed to be attacking their own allies. The Zelonians watched this display with growing confusion. Their computers could not process what they were seeing. The humans were violating every rule of space combat. Morrison smiled as he watched the enemy fleet hesitate. For the first time in the battle, the Zelonians were uncertain. They had never faced an enemy that fought without logic or reason. Phase 2 is working, Hayes reported. They're slowing down their attack, Morrison nodded. Good, now let's show them what happens when humans stop playing by the rules. He turned to his crew. Remember, we're not just fighting for our lives. We're fighting for the right to be human. The right to be unpredictable. The right to do impossible things just because we can. The battle was just beginning, but Morrison could already see doubt in the enemy formation. The Zelonians had expected an easy victory. Instead, they were getting their first lesson in human nature, and that was a lesson no computer could calculate. The Zelonian fleet moved like a giant machine. Each ship knew exactly where to go and when to fire. Admiral Kethver watched from his flagship as his computers calculated the best way to destroy the scattered human vessels. Target the largest ships first, he ordered. Eliminate their command structure. The crystalline destroyers turned their weapons toward what appeared to be human battleships. Energy beams shot through space like lightning. The targeted vessels exploded in brilliant flashes of light and metal, but something was wrong. The destroyed ships showed no signs of defensive maneuvers. They hadn't even tried to dodge. Kethver's computers analyzed the wreckage and found something disturbing. Admiral, his tactical officer reported, The destroyed vessels contain no life signs. They appear to be empty. Kethver's silver eyes narrowed. Impossible. Our sensors detected command frequencies from those ships. The signals were artificial, sir. Broadcasting equipment, not actual command centers. On the bridge of his disguised supply ship, Captain Morrison smiled. The first part of his plan was working perfectly. The Zelonians were logical creatures. They would always attack the most dangerous targets first. But humans had learned to make the most dangerous things look harmless. How many decoys did they destroy? He asked Lieutenant Commander Hayes. 12, sir. All empty cargo haulers with signal broadcasters. Morrison nodded. Those old ships had served their purpose. Now the real work would begin. All ships begin Phase 2, scatter pattern Delta, make them guess which targets are real. The human fleet broke apart like a puzzle being thrown into the air. Small groups of ships headed in different directions. Some dove toward the nearby asteroid field. Others climbed away from the star. A few seemed to be heading straight for the enemy, Commander. Sullivan was aboard a medical frigate that had been disguised to look like a weapons platform. She watched as Zelonian ships turned to follow her group. "They're taking the bait," she reported to Morrison. 6 enemy destroyers are pursuing us. Good, lead them into the asteroid field. Time to show them what happens when humans get creative. Sullivan's group of ships entered the rocky maze at high speed. The Zelonians followed, their perfect formation intact. But the asteroids changed everything. The space rocks blocked their sensors and disrupted their targeting systems. Now, Sullivan ordered, the human ships scattered like startled fish. They used the asteroids as cover, ducking behind rocks and changing direction unpredictably. The Zelonians tried to follow, but their rigid formation made them clumsy in the tight spaces. One human ship, a converted mining vessel, suddenly reversed course and headed straight for a Zelonian destroyer. The alien ship's computers calculated the collision course and prepared to destroy the incoming vessel, but at the last second, the human ship fired its mining lasers at a nearby asteroid. The rock exploded into thousands of pieces, creating a cloud of debris that blinded the Zelonian sensors. The human ship disappeared into the chaos. Where did it go? The Zelonian captain demanded. His computers couldn't answer. The human ship had vanished into the asteroid field like a ghost. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Commander Hayes was coordinating the deception from her position aboard another disguised vessel. She had learned something important about the enemy during their first attack. "Sir, I've figured out how their targeting systems work," she reported to Morrison. "They identify threats based on energy signatures and ship configurations, but they're not very good at adapting to changes." Morrison leaned forward in his chair. "What do you mean?" "They see what they expect to see. If a ship looks like a cargo hauler, they classify it as non-threatening. If it looks like a battleship, they target it immediately." Morrison smiled. "So we give them what they expect to see." Hayes began transmitting new orders to the fleet. Human ships started broadcasting false sensor readings. Small fighters made themselves look like huge battleships. Real warships disguised themselves as harmless transports. The Zelonians found themselves facing an enemy that changed appearance every few minutes. Their computers couldn't keep track of which ships were dangerous and which were harmless. "This is impossible," Admiral Kethver muttered. "Their fleet composition keeps changing." His tactical officer looked confused. "Sir, it appears they have more ships than we initially detected. But that doesn't match our sensor readings." Kethver studied the display. The human fleet seemed to be growing larger, not smaller. Ships that had been destroyed were somehow reappearing. Small vessels were suddenly reading as massive dreadnoughts. "They're using some kind of sensor jamming," he decided. "Increase scanning power. We need accurate readings." But increasing their scanning power only made things worse. The humans were using their own captured Zelonian equipment against them. Every time the aliens tried to get a clear picture of the human fleet, they received more confusing data. In another part of the battle, tech specialist Amy Rodriguez was working from a hidden bunker on a nearby moon. She had been studying captured Zellonian technology for months, looking for weaknesses. Got it, she whispered to herself as she found what she was looking for. The Zellonian fleet used a single communication network to coordinate their movements. Every ship was connected to every other ship. It was their greatest strength, but Rodriguez had found a way to turn it into their greatest weakness. She began typing commands into her computer. Lines of code scrolled across her screen as she worked. The virus she was creating would spread through the Zellonian network like a disease. "Jake, this is Amy," she said into her communicator. "I'm ready to upload the surprise package." Morrison's voice crackled back. "Do it!" Rodriguez pressed a button. Her virus shot through space and infected the first Zellonian ship it encountered. From there, it spread through their perfect network like wildfire. The virus didn't destroy anything. Instead, it did something much worse. It made the Zellonian ships confused about their orders. "Admiral," a Zellonian captain reported, "I'm receiving conflicting commands. My computer says to attack the human flagship, but also to protect it." Similar reports came from across the fleet. Ships began hesitating in the middle of attacks. Some vessels started moving in circles. Others fired at empty space. Morrison watched. The enemy fleet began to stumble. Their perfect coordination was falling apart. Ships were bumping into each other as they received contradictory orders. "Now's our chance," he announced to his scattered fleet. "All ships execute Operation Longshot. Target their command vessels." The human ships that had been hiding throughout the battle suddenly revealed themselves. They had been disguised as debris, asteroids, and even disabled vessels. Now they opened fire on the confused Zellonian fleet, but the humans weren't using normal tactics. Instead of attacking in formation, they struck individually. Each ship picked its own target and attacked from a different angle. There was no pattern for the Zellonian computers to analyze. Commander Sullivan led a group of fighters in what looked like a suicide charge against the enemy flagship. The Zellonians prepared to intercept them, calculating exactly where each human ship would be, but the humans suddenly broke formation and scattered in all directions. They regrouped behind a cloud of metallic chaff that blinded enemy sensors. When the Zellonians finally cleared their targeting systems, the human fighters were gone. "Where are they?" Admiral Keffer demanded. His answer came in the form of torpedo explosions along his ship's hull. The human fighters had somehow gotten behind his fleet and were attacking from the rear. Morrison watched the battle unfold from his command ship. The Zellonians were trying to adapt to human tactics, but they were too rigid in their thinking. They expected enemies to behave logically and predictably. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the enemy flagship," Carter reported. Morrison nodded. "Put it through." Admiral Keffer's face appeared on the screen. For the first time, he looked uncertain. "Human Captain, your tactics are unconventional. Our battle computers cannot predict your movements." Morrison smiled. "That's the point. We don't predict them either. We just make them up as we go." The alien admiral's confusion was obvious. "But how do you coordinate without a plan?" "We don't coordinate," Morrison said. "We improvise. Each ship does what it thinks is best. That's what makes us dangerous." Kethver's computer-like mind struggled to process this information. "Such tactics would result in chaos." "Exactly," Morrison said. "And chaos is something your computers can't calculate." The transmission ended. Morrison looked around his bridge. His crew was smiling now. They were still outnumbered, but they were no longer helpless. "All ships prepare for Phase 3, Morrison announced. "Time to show them what humans do when we really get creative." The battle was far from over, but the tide was beginning to turn. The perfect Zellonian war machine was discovering that sometimes the most dangerous enemy was one that refused to follow any rules at all. The Zellonian fleet was in trouble, and Admiral Kethver knew it. His perfect war machine was breaking down. Ships were receiving conflicting orders. Captains were reporting impossible sensor readings. The humans were doing things that made no sense. "Sir, the enemy appears to be firing at empty space," one of his officers reported. Kethver looked at the tactical display. Human ships were indeed shooting their weapons at nothing. Some were heading toward asteroids at full speed, then turning away at the last second. Others were attacking their own allies, then stopping suddenly. Are they malfunctioning? He asked his computer specialist shook her head. No, sir. All their systems appear to be working normally. They're doing this on purpose. On purpose. Cuthbert's logical mind struggled with this concept. Why would any military force waste ammunition on empty space? Why would they risk collision with asteroids? It made no sense, but that was exactly the point. Captain Morrison was counting on the aliens' confusion. All ships, remember the plan, Morrison announced to his scattered fleet. We're not trying to win a normal battle. We're trying to break their ability to think clearly. Lieutenant. Commander Hayes was coordinating the chaos from her disguised medical frigate. She had discovered something important about Zolonian psychology during their previous encounters. Sir, I've been analyzing their response patterns, she reported to Morrison. Their computers are designed to recognize threats and calculate responses. But when they can't identify a pattern, they freeze up. Morrison nodded, so we give them no patterns to follow. Hayes pulled up a random number generator on her screen. All ships' new targeting orders use random coordinates. Fire at whatever the computer tells you to fire at. Across the human fleet, captains began following orders that came from coin flips and dice rolls. They attacked targets chosen by random chance. They moved in directions determined by computer algorithms designed to create chaos. The Zolonians watched this display with growing horror. Their enemy was acting completely without logic. Human ships were doing things that served no military purpose at all. Admiral, a Zolonian captain reported, the human vessel designated Target 7 just fired all its missiles at a dead asteroid. Then it turned around and flew away. Cuthbert stared at the report. Did the asteroid contain weapons, hidden ships? No, sir. It was just rock. The missiles destroyed nothing of value. This was the moment Cuthbert began to understand that he was facing something his species had never encountered before. An enemy that didn't follow the rules of war. Commander Sullivan was leading a boarding party toward a damaged Zolonian cruiser. Her team had volunteered for one of the most dangerous missions possible. They were going to capture an enemy ship and learn how the aliens thought. Remember, Sullivan told her team as they approached the crystalline vessel, these aliens are logical. They'll expect us to behave logically too, so we do the opposite. The boarding party entered the Zolonian ship through a hole blown in its hull. Inside, they found corridors that looked like the inside of a giant crystal. Everything was perfectly organized and clean. They encountered the first Zolonian crew member near the ship's computer core. The alien was tall and thin, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow in the dim light. It looked at the humans with confusion. Why do you not surrender? It asked in perfect English. Your victory probability is 0.03%. Sullivan smiled. Because we don't care about probability. We care about possibility. The alien's silver eyes blinked slowly. Possibility without probability is meaningless. Not to us, Sullivan said. We do impossible things all the time. She gestured to her team. They began examining the Zolonian computer systems. What they found changed everything. Commander. One of her specialists called out, "You need to see this." Sullivan looked at the alien computer display. The screen showed mathematical equations that hurt to look at. Numbers and symbols flowed across the surface in perfect patterns. What am I looking at? She asked. This is how they think, the specialist explained. Everything is calculated. Every decision goes through logical analysis. They literally cannot make a choice without running it through these equations first. Sullivan stared at the display. They can't be spontaneous? Impossible, ma'am. Their brains are wired for pure logic. They can't understand actions that don't have calculated benefits. This was the breakthrough Morrison had been hoping for. Sullivan transmitted her findings to the rest of the fleet immediately. All ships, this is Commander Sullivan. I found their weakness. They can't handle randomness because they can't think randomly. Their brains don't work that way. Morrison received the transmission with excitement. Understood. All ships, prepare for Operation Chaos Theory. We're going to show them what happens when humans stop thinking and start feeling. The human fleet began the strangest attack in military history. Ships started moving based on the emotions of their crews. Angry captains charged straight at the enemy. Scared pilots fled in random directions. Excited gunners fired at anything that moved. There was no coordination, no strategy, no logical plan. The humans were fighting with pure emotion and instinct. The Zilonians watched this with complete bewilderment. Their computers tried to analyze the human attack patterns, but there were no patterns to find. The humans were acting on feelings, not logic. Sir, a Zilonian tactical officer reported, I cannot predict their next moves. They appear to be making decisions based on, I don't know what they're basing them on. Admiral Kethver felt something he had never experienced before, uncertainty. His perfect fleet was being defeated by an enemy that refused to make sense. Meanwhile, tech specialist Rodriguez was working on her next surprise. She had been studying the Zelonian communication network and found something interesting. Jake, this is Amy, she called Morrison. I think I can do more than just confuse their computers. I can actually make them think differently. Morrison raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I'm going to upload some human data into their network, music, art, poetry, things that don't have logical explanations, Morrison smiled. Do it, Rodriguez. Began transmitting human culture directly into the Zilonian fleet computers. Batch's music flowed through their tactical systems. Van Gogh's paintings appeared on their navigation screens. Shakespeare's poetry scrolled across their weapon targeting displays. The effect was immediate and devastating. Zilonian crews began experiencing something they had never felt before. Confusion that came from beauty rather than logic. Admiral, a Zilonian captain reported, his voice shaking. I'm looking at something called Starry Night on my tactical display. It's beautiful, but it serves no military purpose. Why does it exist? Similar reports came from across the fleet. Zilonian crews were being exposed to human creativity for the first time in their lives. Their logical minds couldn't process the concept of art for art's sake. Some Zilonian ships began moving in patterns that resembled the music they were hearing. Others stopped firing altogether because they were too busy staring at the paintings on their screens. This is impossible, Admiral Kethver muttered. They're making us malfunction without attacking our systems, but it wasn't malfunction. It was the first time in Zilonian history that their species was experiencing emotion, and they had no idea how to handle it. Captain Morrison watched as the enemy fleet began to lose cohesion. Ships were breaking formation. Some were spinning in circles. Others had stopped moving entirely. Sir, Lieutenant Commander Hayes reported, their attack patterns are completely random now. I don't think they know what they're doing anymore. Morrison nodded. That's the point. We've introduced them to chaos. Now they're learning what it feels like to be confused. The battle was turning into something unprecedented. The most logical species in the galaxy was being defeated by the most illogical tactics in history. All ships prepare for the final phase, Morrison announced. Time to show them what humans do when we combine logic with chaos. The Zilonians were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy was one that could think both logically and emotionally at the same time. And that was something their perfect computers could never calculate. The space around Earth had become a battlefield unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Zilonian ships drifted in confused patterns while human vessels darted between them like angry bees. But Admiral Kethver had one final weapon that could end everything. Deploy the World Killer, he ordered. From the center of the Zilonian formation, a massive shape began to emerge. The dreadnought was 10 times larger than any other ship in either fleet. Its crystalline hull gleamed with deadly energy as weapon systems came online. Captain Morrison watched the monster appear on his screens. His heart sank as he read the energy readings. How big is that thing? He asked Lieutenant Commander Hayes. Hayes checked her instruments twice before answering. 12 kilometers long, sir. Its main weapon can destroy an entire planet. Morrison felt the weight of impossible odds pressing down on him again. Just when they had started to turn the battle around, the enemy revealed their ultimate weapon. "Sir, we're getting reports from all ships," Lieutenant Ben Carter said. "Everyone can see it. Morale is dropping fast." Morrison understood why. The World Killer was so massive it blocked out the stars behind it. Its energy core was charging with enough power to burn Earth's surface to ash. "How long until it's ready to fire?" Morrison asked. Hayes calculated quickly. 20 minutes, sir. 20 minutes to save an entire planet." Morrison looked around his bridge. His crew was scared, but they were still at their posts, still ready to follow his orders. "Kate," he called to Commander Sullivan over the communication system, "are you still aboard that captured Zolonian ship?" Sullivan's voice crackled back from the enemy vessel. "Yes, sir. My team is still learning how their systems work." Morrison made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone with military training. "I need you to take a small team and attack that dreadnought directly." There was silence on the channel for a moment. Then Sullivan laughed. "Sir, that's suicide. We'd need an entire fleet to take down something that size." "I know," Morrison said, "but sometimes the most human thing you can do is attempt the impossible." Sullivan understood. She had been in space long enough to know that humans succeeded when they shouldn't. They won battles they had no right to win. They did things that computers said were impossible. "I'll need volunteers," she said. "You'll have them," Morrison promised. Within minutes, volunteers from across the human fleet were transferring to small ships and heading toward Sullivan's position. They came from every vessel in the scattered formation. Engineers, pilots, gunners, even cooks, all of them ready to attempt something that had never been tried before. Meanwhile, Morrison was coordinating his own desperate plan. All ships were going to try something new. "We're going to attack that dreadnought with everything we have." "Sir," Hayes said quietly, "our weapons can't penetrate its shields." Morrison smiled. "We're not going to use weapons. We're going to use ourselves." He opened a channel to the entire fleet. "Listen up, everyone. That big ship out there thinks it's invincible. It's counting on us to attack it with normal tactics, but we're not normal, are we?" Voices from across the fleet responded with determination. Humans from a dozen different worlds, all agreeing that normal was not something they were interested in being. "Here's what we're going to do," Morrison continued. "We're going to ram it." The idea was so crazy that it took a moment for everyone to understand what he meant. The human fleet was going to turn itself into a giant projectile and crash into the enemy dreadnought. "Sir," Carter said, "our ships will be destroyed on impact." Morrison nodded. "Some of them will, but not all. And sometimes sacrifice is the most human thing there is." He paused, looking out at the enemy formation. The smaller Zolonian ships were still confused by the human cultural uploads. Their crews were struggling to understand why humans created beautiful things that served no practical purpose. "Besides," Morrison added, "we're not just going to ram it. We're going to do it in the most confusing way possible." Tech specialist Rodriguez was listening from her bunker on the nearby moon. She had been working on something special while the battle raged. "Jake, this is Amy," she called. "I've got a present for that big ship," Morrison grinned. "What kind of present?" "I've been studying human history. Did you know that in ancient times humans used to hide soldiers inside wooden horses?" Morrison understood immediately. "You want to hide something inside our attack." "Exactly. While they're focused on stopping our ships from ramming them, they won't notice the small craft hiding in our formation." Rodriguez had been preparing a special virus. Not just any virus, but one designed specifically for the dreadnought systems. She had learned that the massive ship controlled all its functions through a single central computer. "If I can get close enough to upload this directly into their core systems, I can shut down their main weapon," she explained. Morrison felt hope returning. "How close do you need to get?" "Inside the ship," Rodriguez said. "Someone needs to physically connect to their central computer. That someone would be Commander Sullivan and her volunteer team? They were already approaching the dreadnought in a small captured Zolonian vessel. Their ship looked like just another piece of debris floating in space. "Kate, are you hearing this?" Morrison asked. Sullivan's voice was steady despite the danger. "Copy that. My team is ready to go inside that thing." She looked around at the volunteers who had joined her mission. There were 12 of them, representing every department in the human fleet. They had improvised weapons and equipment. Most importantly, they had the one thing no computer could calculate, the willingness to try something impossible. "Remember," Sullivan told her team, "we're not trying to destroy this ship with firepower. We're trying to confuse it to death." The team had been studying the captured Zolonian technology. They had learned that the aliens built everything according to logical patterns. Every system had backups. Every backup had redundancies. Everything was designed to be perfect, but perfection had a weakness. It couldn't adapt when something unexpected happened. "Sir," one of Sullivan's specialists said, "I think I understand how to break their computer. We don't attack it directly. We give it a problem it can't solve." Sullivan raised an eyebrow. "What kind of problem?" "A logical paradox. Something that makes sense and doesn't make sense at the same time." Meanwhile, the human fleet was beginning its desperate charge toward the dreadnought. Ships accelerated to ramming speed while broadcasting confusing signals. Some vessels spun like tops while they flew. Others fired their weapons in random directions. The Zolonians watched this attack with confusion and growing fear. The humans were acting like they wanted to die. But why would anyone choose destruction when they could surrender? Admiral Keffer tried to calculate human psychology, but his computers offered no answers. The species made no sense. They fought when they should surrender. They risked everything for no logical gain. "All weapons, target the incoming human vessels," he ordered. The dreadnought's defensive systems opened fire. Energy beams lanced out toward the charging human ships. Several vessels were destroyed immediately, their crews dying in flashes of light, but the humans kept coming. Even when their friends died around them, they continued their impossible attack. "They're not slowing down," a Zolonian officer reported. "They're going to collide with us." Kethver felt something he had never experienced before: fear. These humans were willing to die just to hurt his ship. It was illogical. It was insane. It was absolutely terrifying. The first human ship struck the dreadnought's shields and exploded. In a ball of fire, the second ship hit moments later. Then the third, but hidden among the attacking vessels, Commander Sullivan's small craft slipped through the chaos unnoticed. Her team was about to attempt the most dangerous infiltration in human history. The fate of Earth now depended on 12 volunteers and one impossible plan. Commander Sullivan and her team drifted through space in their small captured vessel. Around them, the battle raged as human ships crashed into the massive dreadnought like moths flying into a flame. Each explosion lit up the darkness, but the giant ship's shields held strong. "There," Sullivan pointed to a damaged section of the dreadnought's hull. "That's our way in." Her team of 12 volunteers prepared their equipment. They had improvised everything from spare parts and captured alien technology. Nothing they carried was supposed to work together, but that was exactly what made it perfect for confusing the Zolonians. The small ship slipped through a hole torn in the dreadnought's outer armor. Inside, they found corridors that stretched for kilometers. Everything was made of the same blue crystal material, glowing softly in the dim light. "Remember the plan," Sullivan whispered to her team. "We need to reach the central computer and upload Amy's virus. But more importantly, we need to give their main brain a problem it can't solve." They moved through the ship like ghosts. The Zolonian crew was busy dealing with the ramming attacks outside. Alarms were ringing throughout the massive vessel, but no one expected enemies to be walking through their hallways. Meanwhile, Captain Morrison watched from his command ship as more human vessels struck the dreadnought. The explosions were getting larger as the attacking ships overloaded their engines before impact. "Sir, we're losing too many ships," Lieutenant Commander Hayes reported. "The ramming attacks aren't breaking through their shields." Morrison nodded. Grimly, he had known this would happen. The human fleet was sacrificing itself to create a distraction, but it was working. The Zelonians were so focused on the external threat that they weren't looking for internal problems. All remaining ships fall back to the nebula, Morrison ordered. Time for the final phase. The surviving human vessels began retreating toward a nearby cloud of gas and dust. The nebula would hide them from Zelonian sensors and give them one last advantage. Admiral Kethfer watched the human retreat with satisfaction. His dreadnought had survived their desperate attack. Soon his main weapon would be ready to fire. Charging sequence at 90%, his weapons officer reported. We can destroy their planet in 5 minutes. But inside the dreadnought, Sullivan's team had reached the central computer core. The room was enormous, filled with crystal formations that pulsed with data. At the center stood a pillar of pure light that contained the ship's artificial brain. This is it, Sullivan said. The computer that controls everything. Tech specialist Rodriguez had given them specific instructions. The virus she created wasn't designed to destroy the computer. Instead, it would present the alien brain with a logical paradox that would paralyze its thinking. One of Sullivan's team members, a young engineer named Danny Wright, connected Rodriguez's device to the central computer. Lines of code began flowing. Into the alien system, the virus contained a simple question. Can an all-powerful being create a rock so heavy that even they cannot lift it? It was an ancient human puzzle that had no logical answer. If the being could create such a rock, then they weren't all-powerful because they couldn't lift it. If they couldn't create the rock, then they weren't all-powerful because they couldn't create it. The Dreadnought's computer tried to process this question. Its vast intelligence turned toward the problem, attempting to find a logical solution. But there was no solution. The question was designed to create an infinite loop of reasoning. It's working, Wright reported. The computer is slowing down. Throughout the massive ship, systems began to malfunction. The computer was dedicating more and more processing power to solving the unsolvable riddle. Other functions were being ignored as the artificial brain became obsessed with the paradox. Admiral Kethfer noticed the problems immediately. What's happening to our systems? His crew scrambled to find answers. Weapons were powering down. Navigation was failing. Even the lights were flickering as the central computer devoted all its energy to a problem it couldn't solve. Sir, it appears our main computer is experiencing some kind of logic error, a technician reported. Kethfer's silver eyes widened. Impossible. Our systems are perfect. But perfection was exactly the problem. The computer had been designed to find logical answers to every question. When faced with a question that had no logical answer, it couldn't stop trying to solve it. Meanwhile, Captain Morrison led his remaining ships into the nebula. The gas cloud blocked sensors and made navigation nearly impossible. But humans had learned to fly by instinct when their instruments failed. All ships prepare for the final attack, Morrison announced. We're going to hit them where they least expect it. The human vessels spread out through the nebula like hunters stalking prey. They moved silently, using the gas cloud as cover. The Zelonians couldn't see them coming, but the humans could see the dreadnought. Its massive bulk stood out against the starfield like a mountain floating in space. And now, thanks to Sullivan's mission, it was crippled and confused. Sir, I'm detecting massive system failures on the enemy dreadnought, Hayes reported. Their computer appears to be malfunctioning, Morrison smiled. Kate did it. Now let's finish this. The human fleet emerged from the nebula like ghosts materializing from thin air. They attacked from every direction at once, using the confusion aboard the dreadnought to their advantage, but they weren't using conventional weapons. Instead, they were broadcasting more human culture directly into the enemy ship systems. Music, poetry, paintings, and stories flooded the Zelonian network. The effect was immediate and devastating. Zelonian crew members throughout the fleet began experiencing emotions they had never felt before: wonder, sadness, joy, fear. Their logical minds couldn't process these new sensations. Admiral, a Zelonian captain reported, his voice shaking with an emotion he couldn't name. I'm looking at something called the Starry Night. And it's making me feel strange. Why would someone create something so beautiful if it serves no purpose? Similar reports came from across the fleet. Zelonian crews were being overwhelmed by human creativity. Their perfect logical systems couldn't understand why humans made art, wrote poetry, or composed music. Admiral Kethver felt his own mind being affected. He was listening to something called Beethoven's Ninth Symphony and finding it impossible to concentrate on military matters. The music was beautiful beyond logical explanation. "This is impossible," he whispered. "How can sound patterns affect logical thinking?" The answer was simple, but the Admiral couldn't understand it. Humans didn't separate logic from emotion. They used both together, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. On the Dreadnought, Sullivan's team was preparing to escape. They had accomplished their mission, but the ship was falling apart around them. Systems were failing as the central computer became more and more obsessed with the unsolvable riddle. "Time to go," Sullivan announced. "This place is going to tear itself apart." They ran through corridors that were no longer properly lit. Emergency systems were shutting down as the computer dedicated more processing power to the logical paradox. The perfect ship was destroying itself trying to solve an impossible problem. Captain Morrison watched as the Zelonian fleet began to break apart. Ships were drifting aimlessly as their crews struggled with newfound emotions. The perfect formation that had seemed so threatening was now scattered and confused. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the enemy flagship," Carter reported. Morrison nodded. "Put it through." Admiral Kethver's face appeared on the screen. For the first time, his silver eyes showed something other than cold logic. They showed confusion, wonder, and something that might have been fear. "Human captain," the Admiral said slowly, "your tactics are beyond our understanding. Our computers cannot predict your actions. Our logic cannot process your motivations." Morrison leaned forward. "That's because we don't rely only on logic. We use something your species has never experienced." "What is that?" Kethver asked. Morrison smiled. "Hope, faith, the belief that impossible things can happen if you're brave enough to try them." The alien admiral stared at him for a long moment. We cannot fight an enemy that operates outside the boundaries of logical prediction." "Then don't fight us," Morrison suggested. "Learn from us instead." Kethver's expression changed as he processed this idea. For the first time in Zelonian history, their perfect military mind was considering the possibility of surrender. We request terms," the Admiral said finally. Morrison nodded. "The terms are simple. Leave our space, and never come back, but take something with you." "What?" Morrison smiled. "Take the knowledge that the universe is bigger and stranger than your computers can calculate. Take the understanding that sometimes the most logical thing to do is to embrace the illogical." As the Zelonian fleet began its retreat, Morrison looked around his bridge. His crew was exhausted but victorious. They had done the impossible. They had defeated a technologically superior enemy using nothing but human creativity, courage, and the willingness to try things that shouldn't work. The galaxy would never be the same. Word would spread that humans were not just another species to be conquered. They were something new and dangerous and wonderful. They were creatures that could turn chaos into victory and make the impossible seem routine.